Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the 97 UX Things podcast. Dan Berlin here, your host and book editor. This week, I'm joined with Benson Chan, who wrote the Sell Your Design Ideas with Trust and Insights chapter. Welcome, Benson.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on the podcast. Can you please take a moment to introduce yourself?
So my name's Benson, and I'm currently leading a design and research team over at Amazon. I work on the personalization of the Alexa assistant.
Cool. Interesting working on a voice UI. Have you run into any, are there any interesting research or design challenges you've run into with that worth sharing?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting when we think about voice UIs by themselves. It's such a new field, and it's something that's also hard to recruit for. But with the evolution of personal assistant devices now, we also have screens as well. So we're doing multimodal design, as we call it, which is basically doing voice only, sometimes screen only, and then how they
Mm,
both integrate together.
interesting. Sounds like a fun challenge.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about your UX career? How did you discover user experience, and how did you wind up where you are today?
Yeah, I think my first dab in UX design was actually for when I was a teenager back in the middle 90s. My first experience was using Microsoft, what's it called, Front Page or something. And
Hmm.
my parents ran a small bed and breakfast in Montreal, Canada, and they needed sort of a web presence, or I thought they needed one. They had no clue what that was. So yeah, I kind of did what I could there, and that was my first foray into design. But I went actually did school in software engineering, and it wasn't until I figured out that I was not going to be the best coder programmer in the world
Mm,
that I
yeah,
wanted to get in more into the business aspect of technology. I started out my career in product management, and through that, I worked so closely with designers and researchers, and that's how I kind of discovered my true passion in UX design, and yeah, had the opportunity to switch into a design leadership role at Microsoft, and here I am.
yep. And can you tell us a little bit about that switch from product management to
Yeah.
UX? What helped facilitate that change?
I think in my specific case, I just had a strong passion for the designers on the team and what they were doing. And I was already managing the product management team. And as luck would have it, there was an opportunity for me to manage both, and it made sense for the organization at the time. So
Mm,
that's how I made the transition. And I always find it that much more productive when product and designers are working hand in hand to really think through what the product should be.
yep, yep. And do you personally gravitate towards design or research, one or the other, or somewhere in between?
I say I spend more time on design topics,
Hmm.
but I think research is such a key aspect in not just the design process, but overall product development. So when we think about research and the time I spend there, I try to incorporate research insights into not just what my team is doing, but how we partner with teams like product management as well.
Yep. Hey, and that leads into your chapter. It's a nice segue there. Again, your chapter is Sell Your Design Ideas with Trust and Insights. Can you tell us about your chapter here and fill us in?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think anybody who is in any field, but especially in design, and you're a UX practitioner, I think learning some of the fundamentals around like sales skills are so important. We're
Mm,
always like we always have our ideas, and we need to effectively communicate it. And in in a lot of our roles in UX, it's really a team sport. It's not just about yourself and your opinion. It's also about the customer and about other stakeholders as well. So yeah, I think learning sales skills is just an incredibly important skill to have for everyone. And one thing in my experience that I've noticed is there's just, especially in organizations I've had the opportunity to work in, like Microsoft and Amazon, there's a lot of great ideas coming left and right. And what matters sometimes for a UX designer is actually how you go about engaging your stakeholders, pitching your idea, and carrying that through so that the right solution ships.
It's the way you're describing it sounds like there's the sales aspect for detailing your idea, but make sure that everyone is on the same page. It sounds like there's almost a mediator role here as well to play.
Yeah, sometimes, especially in UX, I find that the best idea doesn't have to come from you.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's about facilitating a process for how the
Yep.
best ideas can come forward, and you so happen to be the one to maybe be the skilled person to have it come to life. But generating those ideas, getting the buy-in, sometimes that's about facilitating, and especially when you're bringing people along and you're facilitating, you actually don't even need to sell your ideas because the ideas came from the group. So
Right. Right. Yeah. Design and research is not just about design and research. It's about people and facilitating these conversations. That's a great point.
yeah, totally. So yeah, in the chapter, I basically talk about four things to master to effectively sell your design ideas. So communicate your understanding of the problem and the goals. Back up your design ideas with customer insights and validation. Build trust with your stakeholders, and show that you have both customer and business focus.
Can you tell us about how folks can go out employing these?
Yeah, so communicate your understanding of the problem and goals is incredibly important because when it comes to selling your ideas or getting people on the same page as you, there's nothing more important than being on the same page about, hey, like,
Yeah.
what is the problem that we're trying to solve? There's nothing worse than somebody going off and coming up with a grandiose UX solution and come back and for people to react to be like, this is not what I had in mind or what I thought was the problem we were trying to solve. And there's a lot of nuances there, of course. But
Yep.
yeah, I think as with any great pitch or any great design process that I've seen and have put in place, it starts with like a strong brief at the very beginning, and the focus of that brief should really be like making sure that there's a two-way conversation happening to dial in on what is the problem or problems we're trying to solve and the opportunities that we're trying to go after.
Yep. And this sounds like the great opportunity to start off thinking about the business goals because UX is all about it, getting the user's expectations, but it also starts with the business goals.
Yeah, so related to the other point I brought up around show that you have both customer and business focus. Sometimes in how you scope the extent of your solutions for that to be effective, you need to keep in mind, what the business goals are, what the latest hot topics are, what the latest constraints are. So a very simple example of that might be that if the problem is being discussed is constrained by the amount of time and or urgency or resources that's available, you don't want to naively come in with a grandiose solution that's going to take a year to build if you haven't taken into consideration that the team might have said we need to like change our registration or whatever numbers optimization for this month.
Yep.
So that greatly kind of scopes what type of thinking and complexity goes into the design solution you're thinking about.
Yep. Is there a good way to efficiently to convey to others that you do have a grasp of these topics and in order to move the conversation forward?
Yeah, I think there's obviously that can happen through discussion. But I think there's nothing better. Like at Amazon, we have this practice of, as you might have heard, like we don't do a lot of present PowerPoint presentations. Um, we actually read like documents that people prepare ahead of time. And so, like what we do here is designers or any discipline, we typically start off documents being extremely clear about like distilling what is the problem we're trying to solve and having a different section on the context around the problem. So any data points that may be relevant to raise, and then also having a clear and succinct statement on what the recommendation is.
Hmm.
That way, you're kind of clear up front of what you're about to get into. And sometimes the conversation starts and stops in like the first few paragraphs because like you're quickly showing what your understanding of the problem is and the context, whether it's right or not, before going into even any design solutions.
Hmm. Gotcha. It sounds like that's a great way to build trust as well. And that was another one of the items that you called out. What are some other ways that folks can build trust with the team?
Yeah, I think with trust, I would think about that like in a lot of human relationships where
Hmm.
it takes time to build trust and a lot of data points. So an example of that may be how aware are you of, let's say, your product management or your engineering partner? What are problems that they're thinking about for this particular project? It may be a different perspective or an angle from yours, but understanding that will be incredibly important to kind of keep in mind as well, and showing
Hmm.
them that you understand. So that's something that I found to be really effective, and that's really about practicing your listening skills.
Hmm. Always. We have to be good moderators and good listeners in return.
Yeah.
Great. The other another one that you mentioned is having user feedback and having those insights. How
Yes.
about for the folks who have trouble getting those, either getting buy-in for doing user research or having access to users? What suggestions do you have for folks for leveraging this topic?
Yeah. I mean, I think one advice I would give is any data is better than no data.
Hmm.
And like at Amazon and at Microsoft, we do fairly extensive customer surveys and user feedback sessions and focus groups. But sometimes, we don't necessarily have the time or the means to do that in every single phase of our project. So, depending on the decision that is at hand and whether you have access to anything or not, sometimes we'll do like kind of more guerrilla style sessions to get feedback from either people who coworkers who are not in your domain, but you kind of treat them as general customer or like family and friends. Of course, it's not ideal to make a multi-million-dollar decision on, but
Right.
when you're just like thinking about one aspect, let's say in usability, or like let's say something around the layout of a screen or wording of something. A lot of times, it's better to ping 5 to 10 people to get their feedback rather than have no kind of third party feedback. And
Yep.
then you're left kind of, as I'm sure many UX designers have unfortunately been involved in, you're left in a sort of an opinion based discussion on what is the right solution. And I think bringing in that third party voice is really important.
Yep. Agreed. Agreed. It can definitely um, get us beyond. I mean, it necessarily gets us beyond just opinion and gets into expectations and experiences. And the great point about going guerrilla if need be.
Yeah, and I think with customer insights and validation, by that, I mean like insights coming into the start of your design project that help give kind of direction. And with validation, it's about, well, okay, we have insights that we think point us to some areas of discovery work, and we've done some of those conceptual explorations and detailed mocks, but then you need to validate it. And again, it's going back to the customer to get feedback. 'Cause sometimes insights could come from first or secondary research. It doesn't have to be speaking directly to the customer.
Yep.
But validation, it's definitely about getting feedback directly from people.
Yep. Why is it more important in validation?
Um, because at the end of the day, in validation, you're looking to get feedback on a particular design that you have. Whereas general insights and preferences give you direction overall on what design strategy you may use or what features to focus on. Um, but validation is about like diving deeper into the actual screens and flows right before you launch, or ideally on your way to launch, so that you have
Right.
no surprises at the end of the day. Like, there's nothing worse than all your hard work not having the right impact because of, let's say, a few words that might have led to confusion in your flow.
Right. Right. Great points. What else about your chapter did you want to convey here today?
I think in what I raise around the four things to master, I think one of the key points to think through is, depending on the phase in your career and the environment that you're in, it's not just about being a rock star designer. You
Hmm.
know, um, skills alone and what you think may be right isn't necessarily going to be what brings you success. A lot of what I talk about are really soft skills, and
Right.
and that is one of the main differences that I see in terms of more junior to more senior designers and their ability to not just have impact at work, but in terms of satisfaction, their ability to really collaborate with people, get their ideas across, work back and forth with folks instead of kind of running into walls all the time. Often I see that as one of the main differences between more junior folks who might require more experience to figure that out, to more senior people who have been there before and figured out, okay, like I need to do more than just deliver my designs.
Yeah, I'm really glad you say that, and I totally agree. Soft skills are something that are kind of lurking in the shadows in the UX world. In that we do talk about the hard skills that we need to have in terms of research or design or content or strategy, whatever we're working on. But the soft skills are the things that turn people into, I don't want to say experts, but into more advanced practitioners. Being able to, as you said, sell your ideas and collaborate with others, and to do so in a meaningful way. It's something I would love to see more in UX education.
Yeah, totally. And instead of it being based on somebody figuring that out through experience. I'd say the other kind of thing I want to highlight is, people do spend a lot of time debating opinions on what the right answer may be through the product development process, and sometimes the answer is right there in the research. So I would highly recommend for any designer, if you have a research access to a researcher to help you with your work, you should be their best buddy, and really fully understand the possibilities of what research can bring to your work throughout the process.
Yeah,
Um, and if you don't have that that kind of access to that capability, then I would learn more about what it means to do research yourself without necessarily having to go and become an expert necessarily. But again, um, some insight is better than none.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, and to oversimplify what you just said, insights and research can help break through the circle of opinion that happens in some meetings.
Yeah, and I think the invaluable aspect of bringing the customer perspective that unfortunately is still not like a habit for everybody. I think is a really good way to lead. Really.
Yep. Yep. Definitely. Anything else about your chapter about you wanted to convey before we move on to another piece of advice?
Yeah, I think with communicating the problem and the goals, I'd say one aspect of how to do that is to not just focus on, let's say, competitive analysis to see how other brands may be doing something similar, or your own kind of heuristic analysis. Take advantage and dive into business metrics. How is the business tracking success, and then using those numbers as well. So yeah, one thing that my myself and my teams do is we participate in the weekly business reviews to make sure that we have sort of a good pulse on what's happening and what kind of
Mhm.
numbers are available to us, so that when we do need help to make the case for something, that we're kind of also leveraging numbers that the business is already tracking, because we know that we know that the business cares about those numbers as
Right.
well. So to not just focus on geeking out on the design and UX aspect of the rationale, but to also bring in the business metrics that people care about.
Yeah, we often in design we often forget about the key performance indicators or KPIs, and this goes back to the beginning of our conversation of knowing what's important to the business, and the KPIs are usually the almost like the root cause of what we should be thinking of.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Great. So thank you for all of that. We're going to move on here to the final piece of advice. What we'd like to do in the final section here is ask you for a piece of advice for folks either breaking into UX or continuing with their UX career. A piece of advice you'd like to convey.
Yeah, I would say that if you're earlier in your career, definitely be hungry when it comes to working on different types of problems
Mhm.
and opportunities. Especially if you're early on in your career, you want to kind of network as much as you can, and yeah, network like out in public or communities, obviously, but even within a company, when you are working on more variety of projects, you will be exposed to more people, and build those relationships, build those rapports, and also learn about different aspects as well of what it means to solve different problems. And I think that will give you more access to other opportunities. Sometimes your next opportunity is based on luck, based on who you know, and the fewer amount of types of problems that you have solved, you're not opening yourself to more opportunities, and
Yep.
instead people will right away think, okay, they only have experience in this, and that's all they could do. But yeah, I think if you're early in your career, definitely expand your horizons and be hungry about solving for different types of problems.
Yep. I love your point about internal networking. I always talk about networking, because that's how you're going to find all your jobs. But honestly, I only think about it in terms of external networking, of getting out in the organizations and getting out there in the world. But great point about internal networking within your company to learn what others are doing and to build those relationships.
Yeah, you never know. That may lead to your next opportunity within that company or even outside the company later on.
Yep. Yep. Great. Well, Benson, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a wonderful chatting with you.
Thank you, Dan.
My guest today has been Benson Chan, who wrote the chapter Sell Your Design Ideas with Trust and Insights. Thanks for joining us, everyone, today, and hope you enjoyed today's episode. You've been listening to the 97 UX Things podcast, a companion to the book 97 Things Every UX Practitioner Should Know, published by O'Reilly and available at your local bookshop. All book royalties go to UX nonprofits, as will any funds raised by this podcast. The theme music is Moisturize the Situation by Consider the Source. And I'm your host and book editor, Dan Berlin. Please remember to find the needs in your community and fill them with your best work. Thanks for listening.